Do you remember middle school? Most of us don't want to remember it. We'd rather kind of forget about it and maybe pretend it didn't happen. If you have kids, you definitely don't want them to see the middle school pictures of you. If they do, the laughter will ring in your ears for days. We all grow out of middle school. Well, we grow up out of middle school. Some men get stuck emotionally in middle school and they never leave. Let's find out what that looks like on today's show. Let's jump in.
Welcome to the Confident Man Podcast, empowering men with the confidence they need to live their adventure. Now, here is your host, David Maxwell.
Hey guys, welcome to the Confident Man Podcast. Now, my middle school days were kind of weird. Although probably all of us could say that. We all had a weird time, but I switched schools right before my 7th grade year. So I came into 7th grade not knowing anybody, and it was really intimidating. And so for me, what I did, I was kind of a big kid, but I was very quiet because I didn't know anybody. So I just kind of kept to myself, stayed back. And the thing that helped bring me out was I started playing football my spring semester of my 7th grade year. And that kind of got me going where I got to know people and all that stuff. But they were really weird times. When you're in middle school, it's awkward. You've got a lot of insecurities and I don't want to go back. People talk about, I wish I could go back. I don't want to go back. They were weird times and I'd just rather not do it. And I talk about middle school today because a lot of men live their lives stuck in middle school. Now, not physically, they do get older and they grow out of middle school, but mentally and emotionally, they still act like middle schoolers. They don't mature. They live with some of the same attitudes and emotions they had as a middle schooler. Now, we understand that when you're 13 years old and you're emotionally immature, 12 years old, we get it because you're a child. But when you're 30, 35, and 40 and you're still acting like a middle schooler, that's just strange. The problem is so many men today, they don't even notice. We've kind of made a place for that immature man in our society. We've made it to where a lot of men don't have to grow up. They can stay an emotional middle schooler their whole life. In fact, a lot of guys, what they do is they surround themselves with a group of men who are in a similar emotional boat. So it's kind of like the pack of middle schoolers, except they're adult men's. So how do you know as a man if you're stuck in middle school? How do you know if parts of you are still stuck in that middle school age? Well, you look for two key signs. The first one is emotional extremes, and the second one is playing the parts. All right, guys, we want to talk first about emotional extremes. If you're a man who's stuck in middle school, you tend to have a lot of emotional extremes. And I'm not talking about if you just get emotional sometimes or if you're a very passionate person. We've talked about that. Men should be passionate. But the thing about middle schoolers is they're all over the place emotionally all the time. Now, for them, it's because they're growing and changing. They're full of hormones. They're trying to figure that out. But it's something we're supposed to grow out of. And as men, we're supposed to mature. We're supposed to move past being extreme in our emotions. We're not supposed to live that way. But a lot of men today stay in that state. They live with a lot of emotional highs and lows, and they don't really control their emotions. They allow their emotions to control them. Now, why is this? Well, for a lot of guys, the extremes come out of the fact that maybe they've stunted their emotional growth, or they're missing role models, or they've had a selfish focus. Now, when we say stunted emotional growth, we have to think about how a lot of men during their middle school years, their emotions kind of get hit and they kind of get hurt. And so they stop growing. And there's a lot of things that cause this. Some guys are bullied. And so their emotions are really caught up in that bullying aspect. And it affects them their whole life. Some guys are the bullies. And so they live with that in their life. And sometimes they stay acting that way their whole life. Some guys, when they're middle schoolers, they have tragic situations happen in the family. Or tragic situations have happened before they hit middle school, but it's really middle school when they start to deal with it. They start to think about it, or they start to run away from it emotionally. Some guys have been coddled and babied where they didn't have to do anything. Everything was done for them. They were catered to. And that can crush them emotionally because they don't grow. They don't have to grow. Everybody's doing something for them. Why would I grow? Some guys have their first crush, or they're crushed by a first crush, and they never move past it. So they stay an emotional teenager. They stay that middle schooler when it comes to women, because they got crushed by their 7th, 6th grade crush or whatever. And again, it can hurt them so much, they just avoid relationships, or they're just terrible in relationships. A lot of guys start seeing things that really hurts them media-wise. They look at porn. They start watching horror movies or really violent movies. And these things affect them in a negative way, and they never really deal with it. All of these areas hurt men. It hurts their development. Now understand, I'm not saying these are excuses. I'm not saying all of these give you an excuse to say, well, I was bullied, so I can, act this way. Or, Mary in 7th grade left me for Joe and I've never gotten over it. Those are realities, but they're not excuses. And that's the thing we've got to understand. We can't use them as excuses to stay that way or to never grow. Men need to take responsibility of their own emotions. They need to work through them or they'll never grow. That's what being a man is all about. If we don't grow emotionally, we can never develop deep, intimate relationships. And that's where a lot of men are today. They wonder why they aren't close to their wife, to their girlfriend, to their kids, to their friends. It's because they lack the emotional growth to be close. And that happens to a lot of men when they've been stunted emotionally in their growth. Now, a lot of guys, they grew up without a role model. They didn't have the role model who was there. And that's a reality for a lot of us as men today. A lot of men grew up in a single parent home with just their mom, and maybe their dad lived far away or just wasn't that involved. Or maybe they didn't even know their dad. Some guys had a dad who may have been there, but he wasn't the best role model. Maybe he was a bad role model. And that hurts us as men. It hurts our development. It hurts us as we grow. And it's a key time. Middle school is a key time for us as men. And so we need that positive male role model. And a lot of us never had it. And so our growth is stunted. We don't really understand what it means to be a man. What is a man? Well, we don't know. And so a lot of young men, they need those role models. And if they're not there, they usually go look for some. They go to try to find someone or something to kind of latch onto. And a lot of men grab what society says a man is, or they grab a media example. They look at like a James Bond or someone like that. And so what that does is that becomes their role model. I want to grow up to be like a James Bond. I want to grow up to be like a Batman. I want to grow up to be like, fill in the blank. And so they fixate on these guys and they let these guys become their models. And the thing about it is most of those characters are fictional. They're not real. And so what they're doing is they're setting who they are as a man based on a fictional person. And they fixate on them. And so that becomes the thing that really develops their whole life. And some guys get into gangs and things. And the peer pressure of the gang is to be in the gang. And what the gang does is it provides that male role model atmosphere that so many guys are looking for. Guys do it in sports. They do it in all kinds of things. And the problem is these aren't real, and a lot of them are very destructive. So a lot of men out there are paying the price for setting up a role model that's not real, and it hurts them. And a lot of young men are influenced by men who maybe aren't the best role models. Maybe emotionally, they're not really good role models, but that's all the guy had. Like I remember when I was in school, we had some coaches when I was in middle school who just weren't the best. Now I had some really good ones, and they were a positive role model to me. But I had a couple who, when I think back to the conversations and things that they said, they were kind of creepy. and they just weren't good role models. But it's an adult male talking to a middle schooler about stuff he shouldn't have been talking to us about, but to us it was cool. And it's so funny because now as an adult, I think you're just trying to get middle schoolers to think you're cool, which means you've got some problems in your own life. And I've seen that. I did youth ministry for 30 years, and you see adults get around kids and they morph and they change, and they want the kids to think they're cool. Hey, think I'm cool, and they're giving a 13-year-old their image. They're saying, if you think I'm cool, I'm cool. Come on, you're an adult. You don't need a 13-year-old to think you're cool. Who cares what they think of you? And what happens is, as kids, some of those guys can influence us. So that's our image of what a man should be, a guy who wants middle schoolers to think he's cool. Well, that's a problem. And what happens is we don't mature as men when we have those role models that aren't that great. The other thing that happens a lot of times is that selfish focus. Many men develop their "it's all about me" attitude as middle schoolers, and it never leaves them. Now, some of them just develop it because that's just our nature, our sinful nature. We think of ourselves first. Some of it, it's because our parents maybe made it all about us. Maybe you were the only child, or you were the favored child. You were the favorite of everybody. So a lot of guys live with that attitude of, well, what's in it for me? They think of themselves first. They think of what's going on in their life first. And that hamstrings a man. It hamstrings his ability to really be a servant leader. He becomes more of a dictator as a leader, and they don't understand why everybody's not like them. How come people aren't listening to me? How come people don't think I know what I'm talking about? And that's kind of their attitude as they live life. They live with an expectation that it's really all about them. And you may have known guys like that. You may have been a guy like that. And so a lot of people do that. And the problem is that some men, they get really good at hiding that. They have that attitude. They live with that attitude, but they pretend they don't. But eventually it gets out. Eventually our family figures out everything's all about you, isn't it? Our wife, our children, they figure out that we're really kind of selfish. And so what we've done is we've gotten really good at putting on an act, but it's hard to do around everybody. And some guys, they're very charismatic. They can get a following. They can get people who feed into them. But in the end, it really is down to they're selfish. Other guys, they have the problem of they've been catered to, like we've talked about. They didn't have to do anything. Everything was done for them. And a lot of parents think they're actually helping their child. Well, I'm gonna give them everything I didn't have. But you're actually hurting them, and they're not going to be able to grow and develop. And they start getting the attitude of, well, why doesn't everybody do everything for me? That's how I was raised. And so they assume that other people are there to take care of them. And there's a lot of men out there today like that. They get into dating relationships and they think, well, you're supposed to take care of me. My mom took care of me. Everybody should take care of me. And it just doesn't happen that way. Now, all of these are realities. And I'm not saying they're excuses, though. We've got to hit that again. A lot of men have these traits, but they're not excuses to be that way. You can say, well, my parents raised me that way. That's why I am this way. Well, you can change. Understanding why is important, and we should do that. But it's not to blame, to get angry, or to make an excuse for yourself. What you have to do as a man is take responsibility. Say, okay, you know what? In some areas, I still act like a middle schooler. My actions, my attitudes, they're very middle schooly. I don't know if that's a word, but it's what we do. And so a lot of us, we are stuck in that emotional middle school area. But the truth is, it's time for us to grow up and become men. All right, the second thing we want to talk about is how we play parts. We're stuck in middle school and we still play parts even as grown men. Many men are accused of playing parts today, of not really being themselves. We see this with all kinds of men. A woman will marry a man and say, okay, wait a minute. When I married you, you were this way, but you're really this way? What's going on? And a lot of guys are like that. What they do is they morph depending on who they're around, depending on what part they're supposed to play. And it makes us think of middle school because that's kind of how we are in middle school. In middle school, we're trying to figure ourselves out. So, oh, I want to be a cool kid. So I'm going to dress like the cool kids. I'm going to go hang out with the cool kids. And what we don't know is that the cool kids are trying to figure out, am I cool? Do they like me? And so all of this is going on in everybody's mind. We're all trying to figure out who we are. And you may have been a non-cool kid, a cool kid, a nerd, an athlete, a band person, whatever. We all have those roles. And the problem is we kind of grow out of that. But a lot of us as men don't. We pick our identity as a middle schooler and we stay that way. And that's a problem. Many men have gotten older and matured physically, but they're still a middle schooler on the inside. They still see themselves as that kid trying to get everyone's favor. They've not done the deep work of discovering their own identity. So what they do is they just move from part to part. Okay, I'm going to be a husband here. I'm going to be a dad here. I'm going to be a worker here. I'm going to hang out with the guys who are crazy at work and be crazy. I'm going to hang out with these guys over here and act like this. I'm going to make kind of dirty jokes with these guys so they'll think I'm cool. And so we kind of morph and change around who we are. And the problem with that is we're not really knowing ourselves. We just kind of adopt ourselves, just like middle school. We take on a character, and eventually it becomes easier for us to play a part and to pretend than to really figure out who we are. And the real us will sometimes come out in certain situations, and people will be like, what's going on here? Why are you acting this way? But the problem is people see it. They see that, okay, you're acting this way around me, but when you go around these people, you act this way. Sometimes our wives will call it out. Our children will recognize it, even if we just pretend and act like it's fine. And a lot of guys are stuck there. They role play, and then that role becomes their life. They don't really know who they are. They don't really make a difference because they're just playing a role. And many men are stuck there. They don't have an identity. They just play parts. You ask them, who are you? And they talk about the roles they play. And we all have roles as men. I'm not saying roles are bad. I'm just saying that your identity is not based on your role. Your identity is who you are. You bring that identity to your roles. Every man has roles and we need to do them. And your identity is brought to that role. But a lot of men, their identity is received from the roles. So how people treat us, how we make money, how our kids act, how our wife is, all of these things, we get validation from those. And what we're doing is we're giving those things control over us. When what it should be is we have an inward validation, therefore we have the strength to do these roles and to do them well. Every man has roles. And part of our job, though, as men, the most important thing we can do is do that deep work and find out who we are as a man. You see, the deeper you are as a man, the deeper your relationships will be, the better you'll be for your roles. You'll be able to be a much better husband when you really know who you are than a man who's just pretending to be a good husband because that's all he knows. He's not really bringing it from within himself. He's just playing a part. Okay, let me say what she wants me to say because I know this is what she wants me to say. But you don't really have any genuine things. And a lot of times our wives pick up on that. They sense that there's just something not there. And what they want for you to be is an authentic man. But a lot of us as men, we don't know how to be authentic. But when you're authentic, when you know who you are, that's when you really have a bigger impact on others, a bigger impact on the relationships at work, at home. All your relationships get better. A lot of guys are out there just grinding. They're grinding for money. They're grinding for success because they're trying to find that validation from that. Well, if I make money, I'm successful. If I do this, I'm successful. If I rise up the corporate ladder, if I have a big house, if I, one day drive a Porsche or whatever. And what they really need to do is find that true validation, that inward validation that comes from their own authenticity. An authentic man who understands himself can really make a bigger difference in other people's lives because there's a lot more of him to really bring and give. See, a lot of us as men, if we're playing roles, we'll give, but it's really kind of a manipulative give. We want to manipulate the situation or make people like us or whatever. Eventually that gets old and it gets tiring. And that's where a lot of guys just kind of quit and they quit trying because they're just tired. Well, the reason they're tired is because they're playing parts. They're not really genuinely authentic in those roles. When you bring all of yourself to something, you have a whole lot more energy. You're more authentic. It's real. Now, a lot of men, they just play parts. Now, you could be successful playing a part, but it will be an empty success. And what you'll do is just be driven to be more successful, because you're going to find that validation of, let's say you want to make $1 million and you do, then you'll be like, well, I need more. I've got to make 2 million. There's people out there who are 2 millionaires. I'm only a millionaire. So I've got to be more. So what they'll do is they'll just keep pushing and pushing, and they'll never really know who they are because they're always fulfilling that role. Now, as men, we are to fulfill our roles. We do have roles to fulfill, but we're supposed to bring our authentic self to that role. To be the authentic boyfriend, to be the authentic husband, the authentic father, the authentic coworker, the authentic boss. When you are authentic, you bring strength to all those roles. You connect with people through those roles. When you play a part, you're just bringing a character. You're just pretending. It's like you're putting a mask on. You're playing pretend. You're actually kind of doing a Halloween every day, putting a different mask on depending on who you are. And playing pretend will eventually catch up, and it'll hurt you. You'll either run out of energy or you'll get tired of playing a role and just quit. Have you ever seen a guy who just walks away from his family, from everything, and, runs off, with some young girl or something, and you're like, what happened to him? Well, what probably happened is he was playing roles and just got tired and just ran away from it. You see, when you play roles and you don't know who you are, that's kind of a selfish focus. It's what happens. And what happens with you is you're going to not bring your authentic self to everything. You're going to be playing a part. And whenever you play a part, you don't bring the best of yourself to your life. You're not going to be an authentic man. And the thing our society needs the most is authentic men. So I want to challenge you to really look at yourself. You have roles to fill, but are you relying on those roles to fulfill you? Or are you bringing all of yourself to that role? Because what you want to do is be an authentic man. Authentic men can connect, and authentic men can really change the world. All right, guys, in closing, let me say this, that there's a difference between being stuck in middle school and sometimes acting like a middle schooler. Sometimes we all have those moments of childishness, and I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about who we are all the time. Because one of the strengths of men is their ability to play even as they get older. And I think it's something they bring into the family, into their children, that men have that playful attitude. And I think it's important. I think it's a way we connect with our children. Play is one of the best ways you can connect with your children. So you want to still have a little bit of that childishness to bring to situations, to bring fun to situations. But what you want to do is do it genuinely as who you are. Some of us, we're stuck in that childish mode. We're stuck in middle school emotionally. We're got those emotional extremes that are happening in our life. Our growth, our emotional growth has stopped, or we've missed role models, and we've not gone and sought new role models. We're not learning what it means to be a man, or we're just selfishly focused. We're only focused on ourselves. All those are signs of emotional extremes. And what we want to do as a man is not live in emotional extremes. I'm not saying you can't be emotional. You should be. You should be a passionate man. You should bring those emotions to your life. But you don't want to let the emotions control you. You want to control them. You don't want to live on the extremes of them, because then you've just given yourself over to them. And you've let them kind of define who and what you are. And you don't want to do that as a man. You want to be that authentic man. You want to stop playing parts. You see, a lot of men, they're just playing parts. They're pretending. They're playing roles, and they've never really figured out who they are. And what you want to do as a man is not fulfill roles to get something from the roles. You want to bring your authentic self to that role. So I want to challenge you this week to really think through, who are you as a man? Are you stuck in middle school, or are you growing out of it? Because you can grow. It can start today, and you can start moving out of middle school and live the life you were designed to live as a man.
You've been listening to the Confident Man Podcast. Click subscribe so you don't miss a future episode. You can connect with David on Facebook and Instagram at David the Maxwell. Find resources to help you as a man at theconfidentman.me. That's theconfidentman.me.